Dr. Angelo Cei is a philosopher of science at the University of Leeds.
Okay, Angelo, the scientific method and its practice has changed considerably throughout history. A major turning point was the mechanical revolution in the early modern period. What is it specifically about the mechanical revolution and this period in history that changed the worldview in terms of what science is and how it can be done?
Well, we can put it in this way, if you like. The mechanical revolution is characterized by, roughly in the 17th century in particular, it is characterized by an extensive adoption of the metaphor of the mechanism to investigate nature. These might look like something relatively commonsensical to us, but it wasn't at all to the philosophers that pushed this kind of program. That was a sweepingly ambitious program in a certain sense, because this idea of reducing all material processes to a sort of mechanism was thought through very carefully. So imagine a clock, for instance. That's a very good metaphor. Now, an analogical clock is made of clocks and springs and things of this sort. Okay, there's nowhere in the clock, in the mechanism of the clock, in which any event occurs without some kind of action by contact. So parts of matters interact by contact with each other in a very, very well defined and localized space. That's the picture. Okay. Now imagine to characterize whole matter in this way.
Sure.
Now clearly this is an enormous breakthrough, because in various senses this is a breakthrough because matter in the past wasn't considered in the previous periods, wasn't conceived of in these terms. If you look at the way in which matter, for instance, is characterized in the ancient world, in particular in the mainstream thought of the ancient world, so Platonic and Aristotelic, matter is not conceived in these terms. It's not conceived in terms of little bits and bobs that are moving around and interact with each other by contact. It is conceived as something rather indeterminate that requires some sort of essence to be injected on it in order to have a form.
Sure.
And once you have that in place, you have a range of purposes that this matter is supposed to realize in a certain sense. So you have a very articulated theory of causes that explain what surrounds us. Not only, and the material level is only one of the various levels in which you can analyze the natural world. With the advent of the mechanic philosophy in the 17th century, matter is conceived looking backwards at atomism, the ancient atomism. So this very conception of that matter is made of these little bits that move around and interact with each other. But a lot more is injected. And most importantly, what is injected is this idea that the workings of these little bits and bobs can be conceived of as a mechanism. That is something that, as a mechanism, in terms of a very strong analogy with clocks, for instance, or with other sort of material things that can be handcrafted. Now, that is another impressive breakthrough in two different senses. The first sense is that it assimilates technology to nature.
Yes.
Something that that is completely foreign to the ancient world. The ancient world never conceived of technology as part of nature. Nature goes on its own way, is characterized by its own workings. Technology is handcraft, is an intervention of the human hand on certain parts of the material world, is conceived as a low-level work, and no one really thinks. I mean, surely not natural philosophers conceived of it as a noble activity. is supposed just to provide means of survival in a certain sense, but anyway, is a low-level activity. It doesn't convey or allows for any genuine knowledge of the world. The knowledge of the world is achieved via speculation and observation, but not by interaction. You don't interact. The model of that conception of science is astronomy. You look at things, you record what you've been seeing, and then you introduce certain kind of frameworks in order to account for what you've been seeing. Some of these frameworks may also make use of some sort of mathematics or geometry. That doesn't matter. But the real point here is that you observe, record, and explain.
Sure.
You don't interact.
Yeah. So it's intellectual reflection, not actual interaction.
Yes, the interactive element is essentially is minor. This image that I've been giving to you is clearly is to some extent overstated in a sense that we know that in the Hellenistic period there were attempts to reform this approach and introduce some kind of interaction, but they were essentially minor, and it's never clear from the evidences, the historical evidences we have, that anything even close to the mechanical philosophy has ever been introduced in that period. It doesn't seem that they conceived of technological output in these terms. Whereas one dominant feature of the mechanical philosophy is this idea that you produce technology because you're following nature, essentially. So you cannot produce technology tricking nature. You cannot violate the laws of nature by producing technology. All you do when you produce technology is employing certain kind of natural regularities and certain types of knowledge that you gain from the interaction with nature to other forms of interaction. The interactive element is inescapable in a certain sense. So when you build, an elevator, well, you're applying the laws of nature. You're not violating them. This is not a trick as it was conceived in the ancient world. This is just an application of what you know. And more importantly, through these applications, you may learn stuff about nature. You may apprehend something about the nature of the phenomena that surround you. And this is a completely novel picture, is a completely novel way to look at at matter, to look at the natural phenomena that surround us. And is also a carrier of an extremely problematic element in the early modern period, because there's people that things like Gassendi, for instance, or Descartes, or Newton himself, for that matter, that thinks that these pictures should be restricted to matter, material phenomena. God, angels, the mind should be left out. Whereas there's people like Hobbes. Hobbes is the bad guy of the early modern period, that thinks that this picture should be coherently and consistently extended to everything. So the world, including in some works of Hobbes in the last period of his life, even God is conceived of materially. So this mechanism extends everywhere. And what we're doing now, according to this metaphor, is just acting and reacting materially. So our conversation is by no means guided by some kind of immaterial and independent mind that is shaped by our will and by our intentions. It's just a matter of pulling and pushing.
This also obviously accompanies empiricism and the fact that everything can be investigated by some form of experience.
Of course, clearly. Experience is, especially sense experience, is a sort of material interaction. So it's something that occurs because our senses are characterized by can be described in terms of the presence of some sort of mechanism. Then essentially one of the debates, one of the very interesting debates, is where you want to draw the line. So there is a point in which from the material level of our sense apparatuses, we step to the mind. Now, according to certain philosophers, the majority, really, this line corresponds to where the mental dimension steps in. According to others, like, for instance, Hobbes, but not only Hobbes, there's no line. What we call mind is just another series of material processes. But clearly, the empiricist component becomes crucial, because if you want to gain information about the world, the only way in which you can do it is conceiving of this system of sensors, if you like, that convey information in the nowhere. So your natural philosopher cannot deny that he or she needs this information to be conveyed, and this is what essentially sense experience is about this kind of informative interaction, if you like. Mm-hmm. So the empiricist philosophy, in a certain sense, steps in that at that point, is something that is again object of an intense debate, because in certain cases it goes married with thorough forms of skepticism about the hypothetical level of our knowledge. So we gain empirical information, we count the items in the world, we track certain kind of regularities, we record them as the tradition that goes back to Bacon wants. So we have to do a lot of handwork in the sense of really studying, really looking at the specific material processes and recording them carefully. So this is the first phase in which science starts being conceived of as, I should say probably for historical, to be historically accurate, natural philosophy. That's what they're doing at that time. Science is something that will step in later on in this brief historical reconstruction I'm trying to do. The natural philosophy is about collecting data and recording them. So because of the enormity of the enterprise, because of the impressive amount of recordings that we have to track down, is no longer conceivable as a one-man enterprise. It's something that is supposed to be done by a collective, by a group. Mm-hmm. Then there are various ways to conceive of how these groups might work. But it's absolutely crucial to the collective element is crucial. And in my view, but this is pretty, in a sense, this is pretty personal. I think this is one of the factors that leads to the idea of a scientific method. Because what the thinker wants to make sure, what the philosopher wants to make sure, is that the community share a methodology. That they can identify a pattern of behavior to go about this investigation that on one hand involves observation and perceptual interaction with nature, on the other hand involves a sort of principled and guided way to record and think through these records. And that is where the idea of a methodology comes in. So, for instance, if you read the likes of Hobbes, but also Bacon himself, who was one of the first thinkers that makes a crucial theme of the idea of a methodology, they all seem to insist on this idea that people, ordinary people, are not stupid or dim-witted because they don't get to the right result. They don't possess the appropriate method. So it's not about, there's no track, for instance, in this literature of the idea of a genius. None of these guys